A single kiss sealed her fate and destroyed a kingdom. Imprisoned behind the cold stone walls of Château de Vincennes, Princess Marguerite de Navarre found not just love, but a passion so forbidden it would shatter alliances and ignite political ruin. Her lover, a war-scarred English spy, their secret. A kiss so deadly it whispered betrayal to an empire. But what if the truth behind that final embrace was even more shocking than murder? What if their kiss didn't end their story? It preserved it. To uncover the twist that rewrote history, comment. What you would risk for love, like, if you believe in fate, and subscribe for the full haunting tale. The morning mist clung to the stone walls of Château de Vincennes, like the whispered secrets of the dead. And within those ancient stones, a love story was about to unfold that would shake the very foundations of medieval Europe. Princess Marguerite de Navarre stood at her chamber window, her pale fingers tracing the iron bars that had become her world, unaware that in mere hours her lips would deliver a kiss so poisonous, so laden with betrayal and vengeance, that it would be remembered as the most deadly caress in royal history. The year was 1314, and the courts of Europe were ablaze with whispers of scandal, heresy, and forbidden passion. Marguerite, daughter of King Louis VI of France, had been promised in marriage to Edward, Duke of Gloucester, a political alliance designed to strengthen the bonds between France and England. But fate, as it often does with those born to wear crowns, had other plans entirely. The princess had fallen desperately, irrevocably in love with a man whose very existence threatened to unravel the delicate web of medieval diplomacy. Born under a blood-red moon in the winter of 1295, Princess Marguerite had been destined for greatness from the moment she drew her first breath in the royal chambers of Fontainebleau. The court astrologers had read omens in the stars that night, speaking in hushed tones of a child who would either save the French crown or destroy it utterly. Her mother, Queen Margaret of Burgundy, had died in childbirth. Her final words a cryptic prophecy about a love that would burn kingdoms and a kiss that would echo through eternity. The midwives had crossed themselves and whispered prayers, for they had seen the mark that appeared on the infant's lips at the moment of birth. A birthmark in the shape of a rose that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Growing up in the shadow of such prophecies, Marguerite had developed into a young woman of extraordinary beauty and unsettling intelligence. Her tutors marveled at her ability to master languages, mathematics, and the intricate arts of statecraft with equal facility. By the age of 16, she could conduct diplomatic negotiations in 7 languages, compose poetry that moved hardened knights to tears, and read the subtle currents of court politics with an accuracy that unnerved even her father's most experienced advisors. Yet beneath this remarkable intellect burned a passionate heart that yearned for something the rigid protocols of royal life could never provide. The princess had been raised in isolation from the common world, surrounded by carefully chosen companions, and educated by masters selected for their ability to shape her into the perfect diplomatic weapon. Every conversation was monitored, every letter scrutinized, every moment of her day choreographed to prepare her for the marriage that would cement France's alliance with England. She understood her role in the grand theatre of European politics, accepted it with the resigned grace expected of royal daughters, yet dreamed in secret of a life where love could flourish beyond the reach of political calculation. Sir Geoffrey de Montfort was everything a princess should never desire. Born of minor nobility in the windswept borderlands between England and Scotland, scarred by countless battles and harboring secrets that could topple kingdoms, he had arrived at court as part of a diplomatic mission from the English crown. His dark eyes held the weight of wars fought in distant lands, memories of blood spilled in service to causes he no longer fully believed in, and when they met Marguerite's across the great hall during a feast of St. Martin, something ignited between them that would prove more destructive than Greek fire. Geoffrey's history was written in the scars that crossed his body like a map of medieval warfare. He had fought in the Scottish campaigns, witnessed the brutal suppression of Welsh rebellions, and participated in diplomatic missions that had taken him from the courts of Normandy to the trading posts of the Mediterranean. At 32, he was old enough to understand the price of love in a world where hearts were commodities to be traded for political advantage, yet young enough to still believe that somewhere in the vast machinery of royal power, genuine emotion might find a way to flourish. His mission to the French court had been carefully planned by a network of English nobles who saw opportunity in the growing tensions between the French crown and its restive vassals. Geoffrey's official role was that of a minor diplomatic envoy, tasked with negotiating trade agreements and ceremonial protocols for the upcoming royal wedding. His unofficial purpose was far more dangerous: to assess the stability of the French crown, identify potential weaknesses that England might exploit, and, if possible, to cultivate sources of intelligence within the inner circles of royal power. The forbidden nature of their attraction only intensified its power. While courtiers danced and nobles plotted, Marguerite and Geoffrey found themselves drawn together by forces neither could resist nor fully understand. Their first meeting was orchestrated through carefully arranged accidents, a dropped handkerchief here, a lingering glance there, until finally they stood face to face in the castle's moonlit garden, surrounded by roses that seemed to blush crimson in anticipation of the blood that would soon be spilled in their name. The garden where they first spoke alone had been designed by master craftsmen brought from the courts of Provence, a maze of carefully cultivated beauty that served as both ornament and metaphor for the complexities of royal life. Ancient olive trees imported at enormous expense provided shadows where lovers might meet unobserved, while fountains carved from marble, quarried in distant mountains, created a symphony of flowing water that could mask the sound of whispered confessions. Marguerite had chosen this place deliberately, for she had noticed Geoffrey's habit of walking alone in gardens during the evening hours, a solitary ritual that spoke of a man more comfortable with his own thoughts than with the elaborate performances required by court life. Geoffrey's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the rough music of a man who had seen too much death and too little love. He told her of battlefields where flowers grew from the bones of the fallen, their petals stained red with the memory of blood. He spoke of distant shores where the sea whispered secrets in languages long forgotten, of mountains where eagles nested in castles abandoned by princes who had loved unwisely and paid the ultimate price. He described dreams that visited him each night, visions filled with a woman whose face he had never seen until this moment, whose voice he had never heard yet recognized as the sound his soul had been waiting for across years of loneliness and war. Marguerite listened as if his words were drops of water, and she was dying of thirst, her heart beating so violently she was certain he could hear it echoing against the ancient stones that surrounded them. She found herself telling him things she had never spoken aloud, secrets about the dreams that haunted her sleep, and the poetry she wrote in the dark hours before dawn. She confessed her terror of the marriage that awaited her, not because Edward was cruel or unworthy, but because she feared that in submitting to duty she would lose something essential to her nature, some wild and precious part of her soul that would wither and die in the golden cage of political matrimony. Their love affair began in shadows and silence, conducted through stolen moments and coded messages, passed between trusted servants. They met in abandoned chapels, where dust motes danced like angels in shafts of colored light, in forgotten alcoves where spiderwebs caught moonbeams like nature's own jewelry, in gardens where night-blooming flowers opened their petals only for lovers brave enough to risk everything for a single touch. Each meeting was a masterpiece of careful planning and desperate improvisation, requiring the cooperation of sympathetic servants and the manipulation of court schedules that became increasingly complex as their need for each other grew beyond their ability to control. The servants who aided their romance did so for reasons as varied as the individuals themselves. Marie, Marguerite's personal maid, had lost her own love to the wars in Flanders and saw in her mistress's passion a chance to help heal wounds that her own heart would never recover from. Thomas, a groom in Geoffrey's retinue, had been saved from execution by Geoffrey's intervention years earlier and would have followed his master into hell itself. Father Benedict, an elderly priest who served as the castle's confessor, remembered his own youth and the love he had abandoned for the church, and found in their romance a vicarious redemption for the choices that had shaped his solitary life. But love, especially forbidden love, has a way of leaving traces that even the most careful lovers cannot hide. The way Marguerite's eyes would search the great hall during court ceremonies, scanning the assembled nobles with a desperate hunger that had nothing to do with political calculation, the subtle changes in her handwriting when she penned letters to her betrothed, the carefully controlled script becoming loose and flowing whenever her thoughts drifted to Geoffrey, the new music in her laughter that seemed to carry melodies from some distant, more beautiful world. Notes of joy that had never existed in her voice before. Love taught her the full range of human emotion. Queen Isabella, her stepmother, and a woman whose political instincts had been honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of royal marriage, began to notice these changes with the keen eye of a predator sensing wounded prey. Isabella had herself been married for political reasons, had learned to find satisfaction in power and influence rather than in the ephemeral pleasures of romantic love, and she viewed Marguerite's obvious infatuation with the mixture of contempt and concern that characterized her approach to all forms of human weakness. Isabella's own story was a testament to the price paid by royal women who allowed emotion to cloud political judgment. Born Isabella of Aragon, she had been married to Edward II of England at the age of 12, a bride chosen to cement an alliance between two kingdoms that viewed each other with suspicion and barely contained hostility. Her husband had shown more interest in his male favorites than in his wife, leaving Isabella to find her own way in a court that regarded her as both outsider and political necessity. She had learned to transform humiliation into power, to use the very neglect that wounded her as a weapon in the complex games of medieval statecraft. When Isabella's marriage to Edward had been annulled due to his deposition and subsequent murder, she had found herself free to remarry, but damaged by experiences that had taught her to view love as a luxury that powerful women could not afford. Her marriage to Louis VI of France had been a calculated decision, a merger of convenience that offered her security and status in exchange for the political connections she could provide. She had grown to respect her second husband and even to feel a certain affection for him, but the passionate devotion she observed between Marguerite and Geoffrey struck her as both dangerous and pathetic. The Queen's suspicions crystallized into certainty on the night of the Feast of All Souls, when she followed Marguerite through the castle's labyrinthine passages and witnessed the princess in Geoffrey's arms, their bodies pressed together with a desperation that spoke of souls recognizing their other half across the vast loneliness of existence. Isabella watched from the shadows as they kissed with the fierce hunger of lovers who know their time is running out. And in that moment, she began to weave the web that would destroy them both. Hidden behind a tapestry depicting the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, Isabella observed a scene that was simultaneously beautiful and terrible. The lovers moved together with the fluid grace of dancers who had performed the same choreography countless times. Yet their passion carried an urgency that spoke of deeper knowledge, an understanding that their time together was measured not in years or months, but in heartbeats and stolen moments. Geoffrey's hands tangled in Marguerite's hair as if he were trying to memorize the texture of each strand, while the princess clung to him with the desperate strength of a drowning woman grasping at salvation. Their whispered conversation revealed depths of intimacy that went far beyond physical passion. They spoke of dreams they had shared without ever describing them to each other, of childhood fears that had shaped their adult selves, of hopes for a future that they both knew was impossible, yet could not stop themselves from imagining. Geoffrey told Marguerite about the nightmares that had plagued him since his first battle, visions of blood and death that only faded when he held her in his arms. Marguerite confessed her terror of becoming like Isabella, transformed by political necessity into something cold and calculating, emptied of all capacity for genuine feeling. What Isabella discovered in the weeks that followed would have been enough to bring down dynasties. Geoffrey de Montfort was not merely a minor English noble, but a spy working for a network of conspirators who sought to destabilize the French crown. His mission had been to seduce the princess, to use her love as a weapon against her own family, to plant seeds of discord that would bloom into civil war. But somewhere in the performance of his duty, the performance had become reality, and the spy had fallen as deeply in love with his target as she had with him. The intelligence network that had placed Geoffrey in the French court was a masterpiece of medieval espionage, a web of connections that stretched from the taverns of London to the monasteries of Scotland. At its center was a group of English nobles who had never accepted the legitimacy of the current French king, who viewed the upcoming marriage alliance as a threat to English independence and who were prepared to use any means necessary to prevent its consummation. They had spent years identifying potential assets within the French court, cultivating relationships with disaffected servants, corrupt merchants, and ambitious minor nobles who might be persuaded to betray their king for the right price. Geoffrey had been recruited into this network during his service in the Scottish campaigns, where his bravery in battle had caught the attention of commanders who were looking for men capable of undertaking missions that required both physical courage and intellectual sophistication. His natural charm and ability to adapt to different social environments had made him ideal for diplomatic work, while his genuine nobility of spirit had allowed him to move in royal circles without arousing suspicion. The planners of the conspiracy had counted on these very qualities, never imagining that the same authenticity that made Geoffrey an effective spy would ultimately make him incapable of carrying out his mission. The irony was exquisite and terrible. Marguerite's love was both genuine and manipulated, pure and poisoned, sacred and profane. Geoffrey had come to destroy her, but instead had found in her the redemption he had never dared to hope for. Yet the machinery of his original mission continued to turn, and other conspirators, unaware of his change of heart, began to put into motion plans that would use Marguerite's love as the key to unlock France's destruction. The conspiracy's ultimate goal was to create sufficient chaos within the French court to prevent the marriage alliance with England, thereby preserving what the plotters saw as England's independence from French influence. They had developed multiple strategies for achieving this objective, ranging from the assassination of key French nobles to the fabrication of evidence that would discredit the royal family in the eyes of their subjects. Geoffrey's seduction of Marguerite was meant to be the most elegant of these strategies, a way of compromising the princess that would make her unsuitable for marriage, while simultaneously providing the English conspirators with a source of intelligence within the heart of the French court. But Geoffrey's handlers had underestimated the transformative power of genuine emotion. The man who had arrived at the French court as a weapon had become something far more dangerous to their plans. A human being capable of love, growth, and moral choice. As his feelings for Marguerite deepened, Geoffrey found himself increasingly reluctant to pass along intelligence that might be used to harm her or her family. His reports to his handlers became vague and infrequent, filled with information that was technically accurate but strategically useless. Queen Isabella's discovery of these plots created a perfect storm of political necessity and personal vengeance. She could not expose Geoffrey without revealing her stepdaughter's shameful affair, which would destroy Marguerite's value as a diplomatic bride and weaken France's position in its delicate negotiations with England. Instead, she began to craft a more subtle and infinitely more cruel revenge, one that would eliminate the threat while appearing to be an act of royal mercy. Isabella's approach to the crisis reflected the sophisticated understanding of power that had allowed her to survive and thrive in two different royal courts. She recognized that the simple exposure of Geoffrey's identity would create as many problems as it solved, potentially triggering a diplomatic crisis that could lead to war between France and England. Instead, she chose to address the threat through methods that would preserve the political status quo, while satisfying her personal desire for revenge against the couple whose love she viewed as both foolish and dangerous. The plan she devised was worthy of the most twisted minds of the medieval court. She would allow the lovers one final meeting, one last embrace, one ultimate kiss that would serve as both their greatest moment of connection and their final act upon the stage of life. For Isabella had acquired, through channels that existed in the shadow spaces between kingdoms, a poison so rare and so perfectly designed for her purpose that it seemed crafted by dark angels specifically for this moment of vengeance. The poison was derived from the kiss of the Mediterranean widow spider, a creature whose mating ritual ended in the death of her partner. But this was no crude toxin that would cause obvious suffering and reveal its presence to any observer. Instead, it was a substance that would lie dormant in the body for days, even weeks, allowing its victim to live and love and dream before delivering a death so gentle it would appear to be nothing more than a fever or a failing of the heart. Isabella had learned of this poison from a Venetian merchant who dealt in curiosities and rarities from the far corners of the known world. The merchant, a man named Lorenzo de' Medici, who claimed descent from ancient Roman families, had acquired the substance from an alchemist in Constantinople who specialized in potions designed for the specific needs of royal courts. The poison came with detailed instructions for its use, written in Arabic script on parchment that felt ancient and evil to the touch. The alchemist's notes described the poison's effects with the detached precision of a scholar studying natural phenomena. The victim would experience an initial period of euphoria and heightened sensation, followed by a gradual weakening that would mimic the effects of lovesickness or melancholy. Death would come peacefully, often during sleep, and would leave no trace that could be detected by even the most skilled physicians. The poison was designed to be transferred through skin contact, requiring only the slightest touch to a vulnerable area, such as the lips or inner wrist. Isabella's plan required perfect timing and absolute secrecy. She began by orchestrating a series of events that would make Marguerite's final meeting with Geoffrey seem like the princess's own desperate initiative. False intelligence was planted, suggesting that Geoffrey's diplomatic mission was about to end, that he would be recalled to England within days, that their time together was measured in hours rather than weeks. The psychological pressure on Marguerite became unbearable. Knowing that her lover would soon disappear from her life forever, yet unable to reveal their relationship or beg her father to prevent his departure, she began to exhibit the behaviors Isabella had counted upon. The princess became reckless, desperate, willing to take risks that the more cautious woman she had been would never have contemplated. The manipulation of information that created this crisis was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Isabella used her network of servants and courtiers to ensure that Marguerite would hear rumors about Geoffrey's imminent departure from multiple sources, each slightly different in detail, but consistent in their basic message. The princess was told that Geoffrey had been summoned back to England to account for failures in his diplomatic mission, that he was under suspicion of having become too sympathetic to French interests, that his life might be in danger if he remained at court much longer. These rumors were designed to exploit Marguerite's deepest fears about their relationship. The princess had always worried that her love for Geoffrey was somehow harming him, that their affair was placing him in danger that he was too noble to acknowledge. The suggestion that he was being recalled in disgrace because of his association with her struck directly at her greatest vulnerability, her tendency to blame herself for any misfortune that befell those she cared about. On the night of the winter solstice, when the castle was filled with revelry and religious observance, Marguerite made her way through passages she had memorized in weeks of clandestine meetings to the abandoned tower where she and Geoffrey had shared their most intimate moments. The Queen had ensured that this meeting would take place by having servants deliver carefully forged messages to both lovers, each believing the other had requested this final rendezvous. The tower had been abandoned for decades, ever since a fire had damaged its upper floors and made it unsuitable for regular habitation, but Geoffrey and Marguerite had transformed the ruined space into their private sanctuary, bringing tapestries to cover the scorched walls, candles to provide warmth and light, and books of poetry that they read to each other during their stolen hours together. The room they had claimed as their own was circular, with tall windows that offered views of the surrounding countryside, and a fireplace large enough to heat the entire space on cold winter nights. What Marguerite did not know was that hours before their meeting, Geoffrey had been summoned to Queen Isabella's private chambers. There, in a room hung with tapestries depicting biblical scenes of betrayal and redemption, the Queen had revealed everything she knew about his mission, his orders, and his change of heart. The confrontation between them was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, as Isabella systematically destroyed Geoffrey's hopes while offering him a single chance at salvation. Isabella's chambers were designed to intimidate and awe visitors, with walls covered in tapestries that depicted scenes from the lives of saints and martyrs. The centerpiece was a massive tapestry showing the betrayal of Christ by Judas, woven with threads of gold and silver that caught the candlelight and made the figures seem to move with their own inner life. Isabella had positioned herself beneath this tapestry deliberately, understanding the symbolic power of the scene and its relevance to the conversation she was about to conduct. She presented him with two choices, each designed to damn him regardless of which path he chose. He could flee the castle that very night, abandoning Marguerite forever but preserving both their lives, or he could meet with the princess one final time, knowing that their kiss would be his death sentence. The poison Isabella showed him was contained in a ring she wore, a piece of jewelry that could transfer its deadly cargo with the slightest contact with skin, a contact that would be inevitable if Geoffrey touched the princess's face or lips as lovers do. The ring was itself a work of art, crafted by Byzantine artisans who had embedded the poison in a matrix of precious metals and jewels that would release their deadly cargo only when exposed to the warmth of human skin. Isabella had acquired it as part of a dowry payment years earlier, never imagining that she would have occasion to use its lethal properties. The poison was virtually undetectable, designed to mimic the effects of sudden illness or natural causes that would arouse no suspicion from physicians or investigators. But Isabella's cruelty went deeper than simple murder. She revealed to Geoffrey that Marguerite had never been an innocent victim of his deception, that the princess had known from their first meeting that he was more than he appeared to be, that her love had been built upon the foundation of shared secrets and mutual manipulation. The letters Isabella produced, written in Marguerite's own hand, suggested that the princess had been playing her own game of political seduction, using Geoffrey's obvious attraction to her to gather intelligence about English military plans and diplomatic strategies. The documents Isabella presented were a mixture of genuine correspondence and carefully crafted forgeries, designed to create maximum psychological impact while maintaining sufficient plausibility to convince a man already shattered by the revelation of his exposure. Some of the letters were authentic communications between Marguerite and her tutors, discussing the political implications of various diplomatic developments. Others were complete fabrications, written in a hand that closely mimicked the princess's own script, and filled with references to her supposed manipulation of Geoffrey's emotions for political gain. The revelation shattered Geoffrey's understanding of everything he had believed about their relationship. Had Marguerite's love been as calculated as his own had initially been? Had she been manipulating him, even as he was manipulating her? The documents Isabella showed him painted a picture of a princess far more sophisticated and ruthless than the innocent young woman he thought he had fallen in love with. A woman capable of using passion as a weapon just as effectively as any trained spy. The psychological impact of these revelations was exactly what Isabella had intended. Geoffrey found himself questioning not only Marguerite's motives, but his own perceptions, wondering if his love had blinded him to evidence of deception that should have been obvious to a man trained in the arts of espionage. The letters seemed to suggest that every tender moment they had shared, every whispered confession of love, every passionate embrace had been part of an elaborate performance designed to extract information that could be used against his homeland. Yet even as his world crumbled around him, Geoffrey found himself unable to simply flee. The love he felt for Marguerite had become the defining reality of his existence, more real and more important than duty, honor, or even life itself. If she had been playing a game of deception parallel to his own, then perhaps their love was more perfectly matched than he had ever dared to imagine. Two souls who had found truth in the midst of lies, authenticity in the heart of performance, genuine emotion in a world built upon political calculation. The more Geoffrey considered Isabella's revelations, the more he began to see a different interpretation of the evidence she had presented. Perhaps Marguerite's knowledge of his true identity had not been evidence of calculation, but proof of her intelligence and intuition. Perhaps her political discussions had been the natural result of a princess's education, rather than signs of manipulation. Perhaps their love had grown, not despite their mutual deception, but because of it. Two wounded souls, recognizing in each other the same struggle to find authenticity in a world that demanded constant performance. Geoffrey made his choice with the full knowledge of its consequences. He would meet Marguerite in the tower, he would kiss her one final time, and he would carry the poison's embrace into whatever realm awaited souls who had loved too deeply and too well for the world they were born into. But he made one additional decision that Isabella had not anticipated, a choice that would transform her weapon of vengeance into something far more powerful and dangerous. In the hours before their final meeting, Geoffrey used his knowledge of the Queen's poison to craft his own. Working with an alchemist who owed him favors from campaigns fought in distant lands, he created a substance that would interact with Isabella's toxin in ways the Queen could never have predicted. His poison was not designed to kill, but to preserve, to crystallize the moment of their final kiss into something that would transcend death itself. The alchemist Geoffrey sought out was Brother Marcus, a Benedictine monk who maintained a laboratory in the castle's lower levels, where he pursued studies that walked the fine line between natural philosophy and forbidden magic. Marcus had served as a military surgeon during the Crusades, where he had learned techniques for treating wounds and poisons that were unknown to civilian physicians. His laboratory was filled with apparatus that seemed to blur the boundary between science and sorcery. Alchemical furnaces, distillation apparatus, and collections of rare minerals and herbs gathered from the farthest reaches of the known world. Marcus had been present at the siege of Acre, where he had witnessed Geoffrey's courage in battle and his compassion for wounded enemies. The two men had formed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences of war's brutality. When Geoffrey came to him with his desperate request, Marcus understood immediately that he was being asked to participate in something that was simultaneously an act of love and an act of rebellion against the forces that would cage human emotion for political convenience. The substance Marcus created was a marvel of medieval alchemy, a compound that would bond with Isabella's poison at the molecular level and transform its effects in ways that defied conventional understanding of toxicology. Rather than causing death, the interaction between the two substances would create a kind of suspended animation, a state in which the lover's consciousness would be preserved while their bodies appeared to succumb to natural causes. It was a formula that existed at the intersection of chemistry and magic, science and faith, requiring not only technical knowledge, but a kind of spiritual understanding that few alchemists possessed. When Marguerite arrived at the tower that night, she found Geoffrey waiting for her in the chamber where they had shared their first embrace. The room was illuminated by candles arranged in patterns that seemed to transform the space into a cathedral dedicated to their forbidden love. Rose petals covered the floor like drops of blood, and the air was heavy with incense that carried fragrances from the Holy Land, exotic and intoxicating. Geoffrey had never looked more beautiful to her than he did in that moment. Bathed in candlelight that seemed to transform his battle-scarred features into something carved by angels. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of finality that made her heart race with a mixture of passion and premonition. He told her that he loved her beyond the reach of kingdoms and crowns, beyond the demands of duty and the expectations of others, beyond life itself, and into whatever mysteries lay beyond the veil of death. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had shared before. Charged with the electricity of finality and the desperate beauty of lovers who know their time together is measured in moments rather than years. Geoffrey told Marguerite about his true identity, about the mission that had brought him to court, about the ways in which his love for her had transformed him from a weapon into a human being. He confessed his fears that their love had been built on foundations of deception, his terror that she would hate him when she learned the truth about his original intentions. Marguerite, her own heart heavy with secrets she could no longer bear alone, confessed to Geoffrey the truth about her own deceptions. She revealed that she had known from their first meeting that he was more than a simple diplomatic envoy, that she had used their relationship to gather intelligence just as he had, that her love had grown from the fertile soil of mutual manipulation into something pure and transcendent. They were, she realized, perfect mirrors of each other, two souls who had found authenticity in the heart of deception, truth in the center of lies. The princess told Geoffrey about the conversations she had overheard between her father and his counselors, discussions of military strategy and diplomatic planning that she had memorized and analyzed with the same careful attention she brought to her study of poetry and philosophy. She confessed that she had initially been intrigued by him precisely because she sensed that he was playing a role, that his performance as a minor noble was so skillful that it revealed the presence of a far more complex and interesting personality beneath the surface. Their final conversation became a liturgy of confession and absolution, as each revealed the full extent of their betrayals and the deeper truth of their love. They spoke of the future they would never share, the children who would never be born from their union, the kingdom they might have ruled together if the world had been kinder to lovers who dared to choose their own destinies. The words they exchanged were simultaneously a funeral mass for their dreams and a wedding ceremony binding them together for whatever eternity awaited souls brave enough to love without reservation. As they talked, Geoffrey prepared the chamber for their final ritual. He had brought wine mixed with Brother Marcus's alchemical compound, a substance that would ensure that when Isabella's poison began its work, its effects would be transformed into something unprecedented in the annals of toxicology. The wine was contained in a chalice that had been blessed by the same priest who had married Geoffrey's parents decades earlier, a holy vessel that seemed appropriate for what was simultaneously a communion and a suicide. When they finally kissed, it was with the desperate passion of lovers who know they are embracing for the last time, with the tender reverence of communicants sharing sacred mysteries, with the fierce defiance of rebels making their final stand against a world that would not allow them the simple right to love. The kiss lasted an eternity and an instant, containing within it all the passion they had shared and all the dreams they would never fulfill. The sensation of the kiss was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Isabella's poison began its work immediately, but Geoffrey's counteragent transformed the experience into something neither painful nor terrifying. Instead of the agonizing death Isabella had planned, the lovers found themselves sinking into a shared dream state where time moved differently and reality bent to accommodate their deepest desires. In this altered state of consciousness, they experienced their wedding in a cathedral made of light, with angels serving as witnesses and the music of the spheres providing a celestial choir. They saw themselves crowned as rulers of a kingdom that existed only in the space between heartbeats, where love was the only law and passion, the only currency. They lived entire lifetimes together in moments that stretched like years, raising children who possessed their combined beauty and intelligence, growing old together in a palace built from crystallized moments of perfect love. As their bodies lay entwined in the tower chamber, their souls danced together in realms beyond the reach of queens and kings, beyond the power of politics and the demands of duty. The poison that was meant to separate them forever had instead bound them together in a union that no earthly force could dissolve. They died as they had lived in those final weeks, completely surrendered to a love that had transformed them both into something more than human, something divine. The physical effects of their transformed death were gentle and beautiful. Their skin took on a luminous quality, as if lit from within by some inner radiance. Their faces wore expressions of perfect peace and contentment, the kind of serenity that mystics spend lifetimes seeking to achieve. Their bodies remained warm and supple for hours after their hearts had stopped beating, as if life was reluctant to abandon forms that had contained such extraordinary love. Queen Isabella discovered their bodies at dawn, arranged as if they were sleeping peacefully in each other's arms. The scene was so beautiful, so perfectly composed, that even her heart of stone was moved by the sight of love triumphant over death itself. The poison had worked exactly as intended, leaving no trace of violence or struggle, creating the appearance of two lovers who had simply chosen to leave the world together rather than face separation. But as Isabella stood in the doorway of the tower chamber, she experienced something she had not anticipated, a moment of profound regret. The sight of the dead lovers, their faces illuminated by the first rays of dawn, their bodies intertwined in final embrace, spoke to something in her own carefully suppressed heart. For a moment, she remembered what it felt like to be young and capable of passionate love, before political necessity had taught her to view emotion as weakness and sentiment as luxury. Isabella's victory was hollow, for in death, Marguerite and Geoffrey had achieved something that had eluded them in life. Their story spread through the courts of Europe like wildfire, becoming a legend that inspired countless other lovers to choose passion over prudence, love over duty, truth over political convenience. The deadly kiss that was meant to end their influence instead immortalized it, transforming their forbidden love into a symbol of resistance against all the forces that would cage the human heart. The news of their deaths traveled with the speed that only scandal and tragedy can achieve in the closed world of medieval aristocracy. Within weeks, their story had reached every major court in Europe, carried by diplomats, merchants, traveling minstrels, and pilgrims who transformed the tragic facts into romantic legends that grew more beautiful and more powerful with each telling. The tale of the princess and the spy who had died for love became a touchstone for lovers everywhere, a proof that authentic emotion could triumph over political calculation even in death. The political consequences of their deaths rippled outward for generations. The marriage alliance between France and England collapsed, leading to conflicts that would reshape the map of medieval Europe. The network of spies and conspirators that Geoffrey had abandoned for love found themselves exposed and hunted, their plots unraveling as the man who might have led them to victory lay dead in a tower chamber, killed not by enemy action, but by the magnificent excess of his own passion. King Louis II, upon learning of his daughter's death and the circumstances surrounding it, fell into a grief so profound that it affected his ability to rule effectively. The loss of Marguerite, combined with the political crisis created by the collapsed marriage alliance, created a power vacuum that ambitious nobles were quick to exploit. Within months of the lovers' death, France was embroiled in a series of succession crises that would eventually contribute to the outbreak of what historians would later call the 100 Years' War. The king's grief manifested in ways that disturbed even his closest advisors. He would spend hours in Marguerite's abandoned chambers, speaking to her portrait, as if she could hear his words of regret and sorrow. He commissioned elaborate funeral masses that were attended by thousands of mourners, turning his daughter's death into a public spectacle that inadvertently spread the story of her forbidden love to every corner of his kingdom. The funeral processions became pilgrimages, with common people traveling hundreds of miles to pay their respects to a princess who had chosen love over duty. Edward, Duke of Gloucester, the man who would have been Marguerite's husband, responded to news of her death with a mixture of relief and unexpected sorrow. Though he had never met the princess personally, he had been briefed extensively on her character and accomplishments, and had developed a kind of distant admiration for the woman who was to have been his political partner. Her death freed him from a marriage he had never wanted, but it also deprived him of the opportunity to know someone who, by all accounts, had been extraordinary. Edward's reaction to the tragedy revealed the complex emotions that political marriages created in their intended participants. While publicly expressing appropriate grief for the loss of his betrothed, privately, he found himself haunted by images of what their life together might have been. The reports of Marguerite's intelligence, beauty, and passionate nature had intrigued him more than he had been willing to admit, and her death left him with an unexpected sense of loss for possibilities that would never be explored. Meanwhile, in England, the conspiracy that had originally sent Geoffrey to France began to unravel with terrifying speed. Without their primary agent in place, and with their plans exposed by Isabella's investigation, the network of nobles who had plotted against the French alliance found themselves targeted by both English and French intelligence services. Some fled to distant lands, others were arrested and executed, and a few managed to disappear entirely, their fates remaining mysteries that would perplex historians for centuries. The exposure of the conspiracy had profound implications for English politics. King Edward II, already struggling with domestic rebellions and questions about his own legitimacy, found himself forced to purge his court of suspected traitors. The investigation that followed Geoffrey's exposure revealed a web of disloyalty that extended far beyond the original plot against France, encompassing nobles who had been plotting against the English crown itself. The resulting trials and executions eliminated many of Edward's political enemies, but also weakened the nobility's confidence in their king's ability to protect them from foreign intrigue. Brother Marcus, the alchemist who had helped Geoffrey create the counterpoison, was found dead in his laboratory 3 days after the lover's suicide. His body showed no signs of violence, but the chamber where he worked had been completely destroyed, as if by an explosion that had somehow left the monk's corpse untouched. The official explanation was that one of his alchemical experiments had gone wrong, but those who knew him understood that he had chosen to take his own life rather than face interrogation about his role in the tragedy. Marcus had left behind a journal written in code, documenting his philosophical reflections on the nature of love, death, and the alchemical transformation of the human soul. The journal described his belief that Geoffrey and Marguerite had achieved something unprecedented in the history of human experience, a love so pure and intense that it had literally transformed the physical laws governing their bodies. The monk had seen their deaths not as tragedy, but as apotheosis, a transcendence that proved the existence of forces beyond the material world. The journal contained detailed descriptions of the alchemical process Marcus had used to create Geoffrey's counterpoison, formulas, and procedures that read like a mixture of chemistry and mystical philosophy. According to his notes, the substance he had created was designed to preserve the lovers' consciousness at the moment of death, allowing their souls to remain connected even as their bodies succumbed to Isabella's toxin. The process required not only rare chemical ingredients, but specific astronomical conditions and ritual preparations that transformed the laboratory into a kind of sacred space. Years later, when historians attempted to unravel the true story of Princess Marguerite and Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, they found only fragments, pieces of a puzzle that seemed to shift and change depending upon who was telling the tale. Some painted Marguerite as an innocent victim of political machination, others as a master manipulator who had orchestrated her own destruction through miscalculation and hubris. Geoffrey was alternately described as a romantic hero who had died for love, and a cynical spy who had been caught in the web of his own deception. The proliferation of different versions of their story reflected the way tragedy and romance interact in the human imagination. Each telling emphasized different aspects of their relationship, transforming historical figures into archetypes that served the emotional and political needs of their audiences. In France, they became symbols of resistance against foreign interference, martyrs who had died defending French honor against English treachery. In England, they were portrayed as victims of French cruelty, innocents whose love had been destroyed by continental decadence and political sophistication. Religious authorities struggled with how to interpret the lovers' story, particularly the question of whether their suicide constituted a sin that condemned their souls or a sacrifice that elevated them to sainthood. Some priests condemned them as examples of the spiritual dangers posed by excessive passion, while others saw in their death a kind of martyrdom that transcended conventional moral categories. The debate raged in theological circles for decades, with learned scholars producing treatises that attempted to reconcile the lovers' apparent suicide with Christian doctrines about the sanctity of life and the possibility of redemption. The physical remains of Geoffrey and Marguerite became objects of veneration and controversy. King Louis had them buried together in a tomb that he commissioned from the finest artisans in Europe, a marble monument that depicted the lovers in eternal embrace, their faces bearing expressions of perfect peace and spiritual transcendence. The tomb became a pilgrimage site almost immediately, with visitors reporting miraculous healings and visions that occurred in its vicinity. The phenomena surrounding the tomb defied rational explanation. Flowers left on the monument would remain fresh for weeks beyond their natural lifespan, while candles placed nearby would burn with flames that seemed to dance in patterns that observers interpreted as messages from the deceased lovers. Some pilgrims claimed to have heard whispered conversations emanating from the tomb, dialogues of love and longing that continued beyond the grave. Others reported seeing luminous figures dancing together in the chapel during the hours before dawn, ghostly forms that vanished when approached, but left behind the scent of roses that bloomed out of season. The Catholic Church's response to these reports was cautious and divided. While some bishops dismissed the phenomena as products of overactive imagination and religious hysteria, others saw them as potential evidence of divine intervention. A formal investigation was launched to determine whether the lovers might be eligible for beatification, a process that required extensive documentation of miracles and evidence of their spiritual worthiness, despite the circumstances of their death. The investigation revealed testimony from dozens of witnesses who claimed to have experienced supernatural events connected to the tomb. A knight who had been blinded in battle reported that his sight was restored after praying at the monument. A woman who had been barren for years gave birth to a healthy child after visiting the grave. Children who had been mute since birth suddenly spoke their first words while standing before the marble effigies of the dead lovers. But the truth, as it often does, lay somewhere beyond the reach of simple categorization. Marguerite and Geoffrey had been simultaneously victim and perpetrator, innocent and guilty, genuine and false. Their love had been both the most authentic thing in their lives and the most elaborately constructed performance. They had found each other through lies and discovered truth in the heart of deception, had used each other and been used by others while creating something pure and transcendent from the raw materials of political necessity and personal ambition. The complexity of their story reflected the broader contradictions of medieval life, where spiritual ideals existed alongside brutal political realities, where courtly love coexisted with arranged marriages, where individual desire was constantly in tension with social obligation. Their romance had played out against a backdrop of competing loyalties and conflicting values, forcing them to navigate between the demands of their hearts and the expectations of their stations. The kiss that killed them had been many things simultaneously, an act of love and an instrument of murder, a moment of perfect connection and the culmination of elaborate betrayal, a choice made freely and a trap sprung by forces beyond their control. It contained within it all the contradictions of human nature, all the complexity of love in a world where hearts must beat in rhythm with political necessity, all the tragedy of souls too large for the small spaces the world provides for authentic feeling. In the decades that followed their death, the story of Marguerite and Geoffrey became a kind of cultural touchstone, a narrative that was invoked whenever questions arose about the relationship between love and duty, individual desire and social obligation. Poets wrote epic verses that transformed them into mythological figures, while troubadours composed songs that carried their tale to every court and marketplace in Europe. Their story became part of the cultural DNA of medieval romance, influencing the way subsequent generations understood the possibilities and dangers of passionate love. The legend that grew around their deaths emphasized different elements depending on the audience and the historical moment. During times of political tension between England and France, their story was told as a tale of international intrigue and betrayal. During periods of religious revival, it became a meditation on the conflict between earthly passion and spiritual devotion. When social movements challenged traditional marriage customs, their romance was cited as evidence that love should triumph over political arrangement. Queen Isabella, the architect of their destruction, lived to see her carefully planned revenge transform into something entirely different from what she had intended. Instead of eliminating a threat to political stability, she had created a legend that inspired countless others to choose love over duty. The deadly kiss that was supposed to end their influence had made them immortal, transforming their story into a permanent challenge to the political order she had sought to protect. In her later years, Isabella found herself haunted by memories of the lovers she had destroyed. She would often stand at the window of her chambers, looking out at the tower where they had died, wondering if she could see the ghostly figures that others claimed to observe dancing in the moonlight. The sight of their tomb, visible from her private apartments, became a daily reminder of the unintended consequences of her actions, a monument to the unpredictable power of love to transcend the careful calculations of political necessity. The Queen's reflections on the tragedy revealed a woman caught between regret and justification, understanding that her actions had been politically necessary while recognizing that they had unleashed forces beyond her control. She had acted to preserve the stability of the realm, to protect the marriage alliance that was crucial to France's security, to eliminate threats that could have led to war and chaos. Yet the results of her intervention had created different kinds of chaos, spiritual and cultural upheavals that proved more enduring than any political crisis. Isabella's private writings, discovered after her death, revealed the internal conflict that the lover's story had created within her own carefully controlled emotional life. She had spent decades learning to suppress romantic feelings in favor of political calculation, teaching herself to view love as weakness and passion as luxury. Yet the sight of Geoffrey and Marguerite's perfect devotion had awakened something in her own heart that she had thought permanently buried, a capacity for longing that she had sacrificed on the altar of political ambition. The irony of Isabella's situation was that her very success in destroying the lovers had made their love more powerful than it could ever have been in life. By creating the perfect tragic ending to their romance, she had transformed a secret affair into an eternal symbol of love's triumph over death. The kiss that was meant to silence them had given them voices that would echo through history, inspiring countless others to risk everything for the chance to experience what they had found in each other's arms. As the years passed, and the immediate political consequences of their deaths faded into history, the story of Marguerite and Geoffrey underwent a process of mythologization that transformed them from historical figures into archetypal lovers. Their individual personalities and specific circumstances became less important than their symbolic significance as representatives of love that transcends all earthly constraints. They joined the pantheon of legendary lovers whose stories serve as eternal reminders of the human capacity for devotion that surpasses reason, duty, and even life itself. The transformation of their story from historical fact to cultural myth reflected the human need for narratives that give meaning to the experience of love in all its complexity and contradiction. Their romance provided a template for understanding how authentic emotion can emerge from deceptive circumstances, how political enemies can become spiritual allies, how death can serve love rather than defeating it. Their story suggested that the highest forms of human connection transcend the categories that societies use to organize and control human relationships. In the end, the deadly kiss of the condemned princess became more than just a historical curiosity or a romantic tragedy. It became a meditation on the price of love in a world built upon power, a testament to the human capacity for both creation and destruction, a reminder that even in the darkest corridors of political ambition, something pure and beautiful can bloom, if only for a moment, if only long enough to transform two ordinary souls into legends that will outlive the kingdoms they were born to serve. The tower where they died became a pilgrimage site for lovers, a place where young couples would come to pledge their devotion and ask for the blessing of two souls who had chosen eternity together over a lifetime apart. The story of their deadly kiss was passed down through generations, changing with each telling but never losing its essential power to move hearts and inspire dreams of love so perfect it could survive even death itself. The physical structure of the tower underwent its own transformation over the centuries, as pilgrims and admirers added elements that reflected their understanding of the lover's story. The walls were covered with inscriptions in dozens of languages, love poems and prayers carved by visitors who sought to connect their own romantic hopes with the legend of Marguerite and Geoffrey. The chamber where they died was filled with offerings, flowers that were replaced daily by anonymous hands, candles that burned continuously, small tokens left by lovers who believed that proximity to the site of such perfect love might bless their own relationships. Medieval architects and artists were commissioned to create additions to the tower that would honor the lover's memory while accommodating the growing number of pilgrims. A spiral staircase was carved with reliefs depicting scenes from their romance, from their first meeting in the moonlit garden to their final embrace in the tower chamber. Stained glass windows were installed that cast colored light in patterns that seemed to dance like the spirits some claimed to see moving through the space. The economic impact of the pilgrimage site transformed the surrounding region, as merchants, innkeepers, and craftsmen established businesses to serve the constant stream of visitors. A small town grew up around the castle, populated by people whose livelihoods depended on the continued power of the lover's story to attract romantic pilgrims. Local artisans specialized in creating souvenirs that captured elements of the legend. Jewelry designed to replicate the poisoned ring that had caused their deaths, perfumes that claimed to recreate the scents that had filled their final meeting, books containing the poetry they had supposedly shared during their secret courtship. The commercialization of their story raised questions about the relationship between authentic emotion and its cultural representation, between the private reality of the lover's experience and the public meanings that their deaths had acquired. Yet even the most cynical observers had to acknowledge that something genuine continued to emanate from the tower, a spiritual presence that transcended the tourist industry that had grown around it. Visitors often reported experiencing profound emotional responses that had nothing to do with the souvenirs they purchased or the services they consumed. Moments of connection with something sacred that seemed to exist independent of its commercial exploitation. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, the story of Marguerite and Geoffrey was rediscovered by humanist scholars who found in their romance themes that resonated with changing ideas about individual rights and the nature of authentic emotion. Renaissance poets and dramatists created new versions of their story that emphasized different aspects of their relationship, focusing on questions about free will, the conflict between passion and reason, and the possibility of spiritual transcendence through human love. The Renaissance interpretation of their story reflected the period's growing emphasis on individual agency and personal fulfillment. Writers like Dante and Petrarch saw in the lover's tale a reflection of their own beliefs about the transformative power of romantic devotion, the possibility that human love could serve as a pathway to divine understanding. Their story was cited as evidence that the highest forms of earthly affection were not obstacles to spiritual development, but manifestations of the same creative force that governed the movements of the stars and the growth of flowers. Renaissance artists created visual representations of the lovers that emphasized their spiritual, rather than merely physical connection. Paintings depicted them surrounded by symbols of eternal love, roses that never withered, flames that cast no shadows, celestial beings that seemed to approve of their passion despite its tragic consequences. Sculptures showed them in poses that suggested movement beyond death, their bodies intertwined in ways that defied the laws of physics while expressing the deeper laws of perfect emotional unity. The scientific revolution that followed the Renaissance brought new attempts to understand the physical mechanisms that might have created the unusual circumstances of the lovers' deaths. Physicians and natural philosophers studied the historical accounts of their demise, seeking rational explanations for phenomena that earlier ages had attributed to divine intervention or supernatural forces. Some theorized that the interaction between Isabella's poison and Geoffrey's counteragent, had created chemical reactions that preserved their bodies in ways that mimicked the effects of certain natural mummification processes. Alchemists and early chemists attempted to recreate the substances that Brother Marcus had described in his coded journal, hoping to understand the scientific principles that might have operated during the lovers' final moments. These experiments produced various chemical compounds with interesting properties, though none that could replicate the specific effects described in the historical accounts. The failure to reproduce Marcus's formula led some to conclude that his journal was fictional, while others believed that the monk had possessed knowledge that had been lost with his death. The Enlightenment brought yet another interpretation of the lover's story, as rationalist philosophers used their tale to explore questions about the nature of authentic emotion in an age of reason. Voltaire and other thinkers saw in their romance both a critique of political arrangements that sacrificed individual happiness to state interests and an example of how passion could transcend the artificial boundaries created by human institutions. Their story became part of the intellectual foundation for arguments about individual rights and the legitimate limits of governmental authority over personal relationships. Enlightenment scholars also subjected the historical record to more rigorous analysis, attempting to separate fact from legend in the accumulated accounts of the lovers' lives and deaths. These investigations revealed the extent to which their story had been shaped by the political and cultural needs of subsequent generations, each of which had emphasized different aspects of their relationship while downplaying elements that didn't serve contemporary purposes. Yet even the most skeptical historical analysis could not entirely dismiss the core narrative, which seemed to possess a consistency and emotional authenticity that transcended its obvious mythological embellishments. The Romantic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries embraced the lover's story with unprecedented enthusiasm, seeing in their tale the perfect embodiment of romantic ideals about the supremacy of emotion over reason, the nobility of individual passion, and the possibility of transcendence through human love. Poets like Byron and Shelley wrote verses that explicitly compared their own romantic experiences to those of Marguerite and Geoffrey, while novelists created characters whose tragic love affairs deliberately echoed the medieval couple's story. Romantic artists and musicians found in the lover's tale inspiration for works that explored the relationships between love, death, and artistic creation. Composers wrote symphonies that attempted to capture in musical form the emotional journey from the lovers' first meeting to their final embrace, while painters created canvases that depicted them as representatives of pure romantic feeling, uncontaminated by worldly considerations. Their story became a kind of artistic touchstone, a narrative that demonstrated the power of human emotion to transform even the most constrained circumstances into opportunities for transcendent expression. The romantic interpretation of their story emphasized its rebellious aspects, portraying the lovers as heroic individuals who had chosen authentic feeling over social conformity, personal truth over political expediency. This reading resonated with an age that was questioning traditional authority structures and celebrating the rights of individuals to determine their own destinies. Marguerite and Geoffrey became symbols of romantic rebellion, proof that true love could triumph over all obstacles, even death itself. As the Industrial Revolution transformed European society, the lover's story acquired new relevance as a counterpoint to the increasing mechanization and commercialization of human relationships. In an age when marriage was becoming more clearly defined as an economic institution, their tale served as a reminder that romantic love possessed its own intrinsic value, independent of social or financial considerations. Their willingness to die for love was interpreted as a critique of societies that reduced human emotion to mere commodity exchange. The Victorian era brought more complex and sometimes contradictory interpretations of the lover's story. While Victorian morality officially condemned extramarital passion and suicide, popular culture embraced their tale as an example of love so pure that it transcended conventional moral categories. Victorian authors created sanitized versions of their story that emphasized their spiritual connection, while downplaying the physical aspects of their relationship, transforming them into paragons of romantic idealism rather than examples of sexual passion. Victorian scholars and antiquarians conducted extensive research into the historical records surrounding the lovers' lives, producing detailed studies that attempted to establish definitive accounts of their relationship and deaths. These investigations revealed the extent to which earlier accounts had been shaped by political and cultural biases, but they also uncovered new evidence that supported the basic outline of their story. Archaeological excavations at the castle uncovered artifacts that seemed to confirm some details of their romance, including fragments of poetry written in hands that matched contemporary samples of their handwriting. The discovery of Brother Marcus's laboratory beneath the castle foundations provided physical evidence that supported some of the more fantastic elements of the lover's tale. The chamber contained alchemical apparatus that matched descriptions in the monk's journal, along with residues of chemical compounds that modern analysis revealed to be consistent with the substances he claimed to have created. While this evidence didn't prove that Marcus had succeeded in creating a counterpoison that could preserve consciousness after death, it did establish that he had possessed sophisticated knowledge of chemistry and had indeed been experimenting with substances designed to interact with known poisons. The 20th century brought psychological and sociological interpretations of the lover's story that sought to understand their relationship in terms of contemporary theories about human behavior and social dynamics. Freudian analysts saw in their tale classic examples of psychological patterns involving forbidden desire, guilt, and the death drive, while sociologists used their story to explore questions about the relationship between individual emotion and social structure. Feminist scholars offered new perspectives on Marguerite's role in the romance, challenging traditional interpretations that portrayed her primarily as a victim of male manipulation or political circumstance. These analyses emphasized her intelligence, agency, and active participation in both the romantic and political aspects of her relationship with Geoffrey. Feminist readings suggested that Marguerite had been a far more complex and autonomous figure than earlier accounts had recognized, a woman who had used her position and abilities to pursue her own goals, even within the constraints of medieval society. Modern psychological studies of the lover's story have focused on the question of whether their relationship represents a healthy example of romantic attachment or a pathological form of codependency that led inevitably to self-destruction. Some therapists have used their tale as a case study in the dangers of romantic idealization, while others have seen in their devotion an example of the kind of deep emotional connection that represents the highest achievement of human relationships. The digital age has brought new forms of engagement with the lover's story, as internet communities have formed around shared interest in their tale and its various interpretations. Online forums debate questions about the historical accuracy of different accounts, while social media platforms are filled with posts from visitors to their tomb who share photographs and personal reflections on the experience of encountering their legend in person. Digital artists have created multimedia presentations that combine historical research with imaginative reconstructions of the lovers' lives, using technology to make their story accessible to new generations. Contemporary DNA analysis of remains found in their tomb has yielded intriguing results that neither confirm nor definitively disprove the supernatural elements of their story. While the analysis has established that the remains are indeed from the early 14th century and show evidence of death by poisoning, unusual chemical signatures in the bone structure suggest exposure to substances that don't match any known medieval toxins. These findings have sparked new debates about the historical accuracy of accounts describing Brother Marcus's alchemical interventions. Modern toxicology studies have attempted to determine whether the specific poisons described in historical accounts could have produced the effects attributed to them in the lovers' deaths. While most experts remain skeptical about claims of consciousness preservation after death, some researchers have noted that certain combinations of plant-based toxins can produce states of suspended animation that might have been mistaken for death by medieval observers. These studies have not proven that the lovers survived their apparent deaths, but they have established that the chemical knowledge available in the 14th century was more sophisticated than many historians had previously assumed. Archaeological investigations continue to reveal new evidence about the lovers' lives and the circumstances of their deaths. Recent excavations have uncovered a hidden chamber beneath the tower where they died, containing manuscripts and artifacts that provide additional details about their relationship and the political conspiracies that surrounded it. Among these discoveries are letters written in Geoffrey's hand that document his emotional struggle between duty and love, along with chemical apparatus that confirms Brother Marcus's involvement in their final plans. The chamber also contained a collection of books on alchemy, philosophy and poetry that seems to have been assembled by the lovers themselves during their clandestine meetings. The marginalia in these volumes reveals the intellectual depth of their relationship, showing that their connection was based not only on physical attraction, but on shared interests in subjects ranging from natural philosophy to mystical theology. Their annotations often respond to each other, creating a kind of written dialogue that continued across multiple books and months of reading. Perhaps most significantly, the hidden chamber contained what appears to be Brother Marcus's complete journal, written in multiple languages and codes that scholars are still working to decipher. The portions that have been translated provide detailed accounts of the monk's philosophical and scientific investigations, including his beliefs about the relationship between consciousness and physical matter. Marcus wrote extensively about his conviction that love could literally transform the molecular structure of human bodies, creating possibilities for survival beyond death that violated conventional understanding of biological processes. The journal also contains Marcus's detailed observations of the lovers during the weeks leading up to their deaths, descriptions that read like a combination of scientific study and mystical meditation. The monk believed that Geoffrey and Marguerite had achieved a form of spiritual unity that transcended their individual identities, creating what he described as a single soul inhabiting two bodies. His chemical interventions were designed not to prevent their deaths, but to preserve this unified consciousness in a form that could exist beyond the physical destruction of their bodies. Whether Marcus succeeded in his ambitious goal remains a matter of debate among scholars, scientists, and spiritual seekers who continue to study the lovers' story. What cannot be disputed is the enduring power of their tale to inspire new generations of romantics, rebels, and dreamers who see in their forbidden love a reflection of their own deepest longings for connection that transcends all earthly limitations. And sometimes, on nights when the moon is dark and the wind carries the scent of roses that bloom out of season, visitors to the ruins of Château de Vincennes report seeing two figures dancing together in the window of the abandoned tower, their lips forever locked in the kiss that brought them death and granted them immortality, their love continuing to unfold in the space between legend and reality, between history and dream, between the world as it is and the world as it might be if we were brave enough to love without reservation, without calculation, without fear of the deadly consequences that await those who dare to kiss with their whole souls. Their love was born in shadows, poisoned by power, and sanctified in death. Yet it refused to die. The kiss meant to end them transformed them into legend, their final breath echoing through centuries as a defiant prayer against duty and deception. Whether you believe it was betrayal or transcendence, one truth remains. Marguerite and Geoffrey chose eternal love over royal obedience. If their sacrifice stirred your soul, comment your thoughts on forbidden love, like, to honor their memory, and subscribe to explore the stories history tried to silence.